She was invisible to everyone, just a janitor in the corner of a glittering tower. But one night, when a deaf guest walked in desperate for help, with trembling hands, she dared to raise her hands and sign hello. What she didn't know was that the silence of that lobby was hiding a secret. A pair of eyes were fixed on her, unseen, unblinking, and the truth of who it was would change everything. Before we dive deeper into this unbelievable story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that keeps you on the edge of your seat. And if you're watching right now, tell me in the comments, where are you tuning in from? I'd love to know. The marble lobby of Harrington Tower glowed under its rows of white fluorescent lights. The building was meant to dazzle, its walls lined with imported stone and brushed steel columns, its floor polished until it mirrored every heel and shoe that crossed it. But at midnight, when the day's parade of executives and assistants had vanished, the place had another face, quieter, colder, a monument to wealth sitting hollow in the silence. That silence belonged to Naomi Johnson. She was 32, her hair tucked beneath a navy cap, her brown skin glistening faintly with the sheen of long hours. In one hand, she pushed a mop across the gleaming floor. In the other, she held the handle of her rolling cart, its wheels squeaking faintly as it followed her down the corridor. Naomi was the one who scrubbed the fingerprints from the glass doors, who dusted the desks that billion-dollar deals were signed on, who polished the lobbies that dazzled strangers during the day. Nobody noticed her. That was the way of the world. Until the night she noticed someone else. She had just finished her round near the elevators when she saw a figure at the far end of the lobby, a young woman, slim, carrying a suitcase. She looked lost, her eyes darting nervously. Naomi stopped, unsure if she should say anything. The front desk was unmanned at that hour, the receptionist long gone. The woman raised her hands and began moving them in quick, uncertain motions. Naomi froze. It was signing, American Sign Language. The young woman's lips formed words she could not hear, her hands speaking what her voice could not. Naomi's heart leapt. Years ago, she had taken a free class at her local community center. She had stopped when her second job consumed her schedule, but she remembered enough. Enough to say something simple, something kind. Her mop slipped gently against the wall as she raised her hands, fingers stiff at first. Slowly, shyly, she signed. Hello. The woman's face transformed. A smile spread across her features, her eyes lighting up with gratitude and relief. She signed back, quickly, fluidly, and Naomi pieced it together. Thank you. You know sign. Naomi nodded, her chest tightening. She signed clumsily, a little. They exchanged a few more words. Naomi apologizing for being slow, the woman reassuring her with bright gestures. Naomi laughed quietly, her shoulders loosening, her world expanding beyond mop buckets and schedules. For the first time in weeks, she felt like more than invisible. But what Naomi did not know was that someone else was watching. Just beyond the staircase, cloaked in the shadow of the mezzanine, stood Alexander Harrington. He had returned unexpectedly from an overseas trip, his private jet landing hours ahead of schedule. Rather than go straight to his penthouse, he walked through his own building, as he often did when restless. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, a tie loosened at his throat, his presence commanding even in solitude. Alexander was known to most only through whispers, ruthless in business, merciless in negotiation, a billionaire who made enemies out of rivals and employees alike. But in that moment, he was simply a man standing in the dark, stunned by what he was seeing. The janitor, the one he had passed by countless times without a thought, was speaking with her hands, offering kindness to a stranger when she thought nobody saw. He had sat in boardrooms with men who pretended loyalty, dined with women who pretended affection, and faced shareholders who pretended concern. All masks, all rehearsed. But this was real. He watched Naomi's hands move, hesitant but graceful, as though every gesture cost her courage. He saw the smile that touched her lips, small but genuine. And he felt something stir in him, something unfamiliar. He leaned against the railing, his jaw tightening, his pulse faster than he expected. It wasn't just admiration. It wasn't just curiosity. It was the beginning of fascination. The young deaf guest departed soon after, leaving Naomi standing in the lobby, her mop forgotten, her heart unexpectedly lighter. She bent to retrieve it, unaware of the eyes that had been fixed on her. Alexander lingered in the shadows long after she left. His world of mergers and acquisitions felt suddenly inadequate, empty. He had built empires, but he had never seen humanity expressed so simply, so shyly, in his own empire's lobby. He whispered to himself, "Who are you?" The following morning, Naomi woke in her one-room apartment on the city's south side, her alarm clock buzzing like an angry insect. She slapped the button with a weary hand, blinking against the early gray light that seeped through her blinds. The room was simple, almost bare, a twin bed pressed against the wall, a chipped dresser, and a small kitchenette crowded with mismatched mugs. Her first thought, as always, was of her mother. "Mom, you awake?" she called softly. From the other side of the thin curtain that separated the bed from a recliner came a faint cough. Marjorie Johnson, 70 and frail, pushed herself up with trembling arms. "I've been awake since your alarm started fussing," she said with a small smile. Naomi hurried to her, adjusting the blanket around her shoulders. Marjorie's health had declined in recent years, diabetes, arthritis, and the creeping weakness that came from decades of hard work as a seamstress. Doctors recommended specialized care, but Naomi could barely keep up with rent and prescriptions. She carried 2 jobs to make it possible: daytime hours at a diner on the edge of downtown, and nights cleaning the tower that seemed to hold half the city's wealth. "You should sleep more," her mother scolded gently. Naomi kissed her cheek. "And let the world fall apart? Not a chance." Yet, inside, she often felt like it already had. Her life was an endless loop of work, buses, and exhaustion. Dreams had once filled her. She had wanted to study languages, perhaps even teach, back when she was a teenager who believed in possibilities. But then her father walked out, leaving nothing behind but debt and silence. Naomi became the one who held her family together. Dreams gave way to duty. The night before lingered in her mind, though. That moment with the deaf guest had awakened something buried. She could still feel the thrill of her hands moving, the warmth of being understood, the joy of being useful in a way beyond mopping floors. But she pushed it aside. Life didn't have space for thrills. Meanwhile, across town, Alexander Harrington sat at a glass dining table in his penthouse suite on the 48th floor of his own tower. His breakfast, scrambled eggs with salmon, toast cut into perfect triangles, was untouched. His phone buzzed constantly, lit with urgent emails and reminders of calls with European investors. He ignored them. Instead, his mind kept replaying the image of the janitor from last night. Naomi, her shy movements, the quiet way she had offered connection. Alexander was a man used to control. He measured risks, calculated profits, decided futures with a signature. Yet he could not quantify the way his chest tightened when he thought of her. He had inherited Harrington Global after his father's sudden death. Though Alexander had graduated top of his class at Yale, people still whispered that he didn't deserve the empire, that he hadn't built it, only received it. For years, he ruled with a single mission: prove them wrong. He grew the company's holdings, tripled its stock, and became a figure in every business magazine that mattered. But the cost was high. His friends drifted away. Relationships collapsed before they could deepen. He was surrounded daily by people, yet profoundly alone. His board members admired his ruthlessness. Shareholders applauded his success. But no one ever looked at him with genuine warmth. No one, until last night. He remembered how Naomi had laughed nervously while fumbling a sign, her eyes soft and kind. She hadn't known he was there, which meant it wasn't an act. It was real, and that authenticity gnawed at him, made him restless in ways money never had. That night, Naomi returned to Harrington Tower for her shift. She slipped in through the service entrance, swiped her badge, and pushed her card into the cavernous lobby. The echo of her mop strokes filled the empty space, steady and familiar. She tried not to think about the note she had found on the desk earlier that week, and signed except for the initials H. She had tucked it into her pocket, telling herself it was a prank or maybe an accident. Still, it haunted her. Who noticed her? Why now? She was halfway down the corridor when she saw movement by the glass staircase. A tall figure stepped out of the shadows. Her breath caught. It was him, Alexander Harrington. She recognized his face instantly. His photograph was in every magazine her diner customers left behind. He was the man whose name was carved in steel above the tower she cleaned every night. "Good evening," he said, his voice deep, smooth, carrying authority. Naomi froze, gripping her mop as though it could shield her. "Mr. Harrington," she whispered, her throat dry. He studied her for a moment. Then his lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile, but softer than his usual expression. "I wanted to thank you." She blinked, startled. "For what?" "For what you did the other night," he replied. "For signing hello to our guest. I was there. I saw it." Naomi's heart hammered. Her mind screamed at her to apologize, to explain she hadn't meant to overstep. But Alexander lifted a hand, silencing her. It was, he hesitated, a rare crack in his composure. It was extraordinary. Her cheeks warmed, confusion mixing with disbelief. Nobody had ever called anything she did extraordinary. For the first time in her life, Naomi felt seen, not by a stranger in passing, but by a man who lived in a world galaxies away from her own. And Alexander, standing in that marble lobby, felt the first tug of something he couldn't name but could no longer ignore. 2 nights after their first brief exchange, Naomi wheeled her cart across the marble lobby with her usual quiet focus. She had convinced herself that what happened with Mr. Harrington was just a passing moment, something he would forget by morning. People like him didn't linger on people like her. He had empires to run, planes to catch, lives to command. She had a mop bucket and a stack of bills. Still, she couldn't shake the warmth that had settled in her chest since that night. His words, extraordinary, echoed in her thoughts as she bent over her work. It felt unreal, like a dream she wasn't supposed to have. At the reception desk, she stopped short. An envelope sat propped against the sign-in book. Her name was written on the front in bold, careful strokes, Naomi. Her first instinct was suspicion. No one ever left her notes. She looked around, the vast lobby silent except for the faint hum of the vents. Slowly, she opened it. Inside was a card with just a few words. "You reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Thank you. H." Her knees weakened. She gripped the desk to steady herself. The initials were undeniable. Alexander Harrington had written to her, again. Part of her wanted to tear it up, pretend it never happened. But another part, the part that had felt invisible for so long, wanted to keep it, to hold on to the proof that for once, someone powerful had seen her. She slipped it into her apron pocket, telling herself she'd decide later what to do with it. What Naomi didn't know was that Alexander, high in his penthouse, was just as restless. For years, his life had been scripted. Conference calls at dawn, meetings stacked until night, dinners with investors, the occasional charity gala where he played the role of polished benefactor. He had never broken routine for anyone. But now he found himself watching the lobby feeds on his office monitor late into the night, waiting for the glimpse of a woman with a navy cap and a mop. He told himself it wasn't obsession, just curiosity. Yet he knew better. It had been years since he'd felt a pull like this. Years since someone had touched a nerve without trying. Naomi wasn't vying for his attention. She wasn't angling for favor. She had no idea he was watching, and that was what made it dangerous and irresistible. Alexander was a man used to controlling every risk. But Naomi Johnson was a risk he couldn't calculate. The night came when their worlds collided more directly. Naomi was refilling her mop bucket at the utility sink when she heard footsteps echoing down the corridor. She glanced up, startled to see Alexander Harrington himself striding toward her. Her breath caught. She hadn't expected to see him again. Not here, not this close. "Mr. Harrington," she whispered. He slowed, his tall frame filling the narrow hall. "Naomi." He said her name as though testing it on his tongue, like it mattered. She shifted uncomfortably, water sloshing in her bucket. "Is something wrong?" I didn't mean." No, his interruption was firm, but not unkind. "I came to speak with you." Her eyes widened. "With me?" He nodded. "I wanted to ask, where did you learn to sign?" The question was simple, but his tone was anything but casual. He was genuinely interested. Nobody ever asked her things like that. She swallowed hard. "At the community center. Years ago, they offered free classes on weekends. I couldn't keep going, though. Work got in the way." He studied her for a moment, his gaze steady, disarming. "You remembered enough to make a difference." Naomi's cheeks burned. It was nothing. It wasn't nothing, Alexander said. His voice was low, deliberate. That guest came here in silence, and you gave her a voice. Do you understand how rare that is in this building? She had no answer. He took a step closer, not menacing, but intent. You're remarkable, Naomi. Don't dismiss what you did. Her heart thudded so loudly she was sure he could hear it. No one had ever said she was remarkable. Not her managers. Not her teachers. Not even herself. And in that narrow hallway, with the faint scent of bleach in the air, something shifted. She saw not just the billionaire CEO, but a man, tired, searching, unexpectedly vulnerable in his own way. She struggled for words, her throat dry. Thank you. For a moment, they stood in silence. Then Alexander smiled faintly, a rare, genuine smile that softened his features. Would you allow me to walk with you? Just while you work? Naomi blinked in shock. The CEO of Harrington Global wanted to follow her around with a mop bucket? It was absurd, unthinkable, dangerous. And yet, she nodded. That night, as Naomi moved through her rounds, Alexander walked beside her, hands in his pockets, asking questions in that calm and measured voice of his. He wanted to know about her mother, about her neighborhood, about how long she had worked here. Naomi answered cautiously at first, certain this was some sort of test. But the more he listened, the more she relaxed. He wasn't mocking her. He wasn't probing for weakness. He was simply listening. And Alexander, for the first time in years, felt himself listening too. Not for strategy, not for profit, but for the quiet rhythm of another person's life. By the time Naomi finished her shift, both of them knew something had begun that neither could easily stop. For Alexander, it was fascination hardening into admiration. For Naomi, it was fear tangled with a dangerous, undeniable spark. Neither would sleep easily that night. Naomi tried to convince herself that the night with Alexander had been a fluke. Surely he wouldn't keep coming back. He was the CEO, after all, a man who lived in boardrooms, not hallways that smelled of disinfectant. She told herself that he had only been curious, that his interest would fade once he remembered who she was, a janitor. But when she arrived for her next shift, there he was. He stood near the reception desk, dressed not in his customary suit, but in a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled back, his tie missing entirely. He looked less like a titan of finance and more like a man trying to shed the weight of the day. Naomi froze at the sight of him. Mr. Harrington? Alexander, he corrected gently. If you don't mind. She stared at him, bewildered. I don't think. He stepped closer, his eyes steady on hers. Naomi, I spend all day being Mr. Harrington. At night, I'd rather not be. Something about the way he said her name, soft, deliberate, made her throat tighten. She nodded slowly, unable to find the words to argue. That night, he walked with her again as she moved through her cleaning routine. At first, it was quiet, her mop swishing across the floor, his polished shoes clicking lightly against the marble. But then he began asking questions. What made you take a sign language class? Naomi wrung out her mop, embarrassed. I don't know. Curiosity, I guess. It felt beautiful. Like a secret language anyone could learn if they cared enough. She laughed self-consciously. Not that I had time to keep going. Alexander tilted his head. Still, you cared enough to start. Naomi shook her head. It doesn't matter. I barely remember most of it. It mattered to that guest, he said quietly. His words struck her like a spark. She turned to him, searching his face. There was no arrogance there, no condescension, only sincerity. She didn't know how to handle it. Compliments from supervisors were rare and usually perfunctory. Good. You're done. But this was different. Over the following weeks, their encounters became routine. Alexander would appear in the lobby just as Naomi began her shift, always dressed more casually than she had ever seen him during the day. Sometimes he carried a cup of coffee and handed it to her without a word. Other times, he simply walked beside her, asking questions about her life, her thoughts, her dreams. Naomi tried to resist. She reminded herself that this was dangerous, that gossip could ruin her, that someone like him could never really care for someone like her. But each night, he chipped away at her defenses with patience she didn't expect from a man so feared in the corporate world. He asked about her mother, and when Naomi reluctantly described her struggles, Alexander listened intently. He didn't offer pity or solutions, just presence. That alone felt like a gift. In return, he shared things she never expected to hear. How lonely the penthouse felt, how board members only saw him as a machine for profit, how he hadn't heard genuine laughter in his presence for years. Naomi laughed then, nervously. You? Lonely? You have everything. Everything except honesty, he replied. His eyes held hers, and for a moment, the air between them thickened. It wasn't long before Alexander asked Naomi to teach him sign language. Me? She exclaimed, nearly dropping her rag. You know more than I do, he said simply. She hesitated. The thought of sitting with him, hand to hand, teaching him something felt dangerously intimate. But when he lifted his hands, fumbling with the alphabet, she couldn't help but laugh. No, no, she said softly, taking his hand to adjust the angle of his fingers. Her skin tingled at the contact. Like this. He watched her closely, repeating the gesture. It was clumsy, but he tried again and again, his brow furrowed in concentration. Naomi found herself smiling despite her fear. That night, they practiced simple words. Hello, thank you, good night. By the end of her shift, he managed to spell her name with only 2 mistakes. When she applauded, his face broke into a grin. Unpolished, unguarded, boyish. It startled her, how different he looked when he wasn't wearing the mask of power. Still, Naomi wrestled with doubt. Alone in her apartment, she stared at the ceiling while her mother slept, replaying each conversation in her mind. What was she doing? What did he see in her? Surely he would lose interest, or worse, decide she had overstepped. She couldn't afford to lose her job, not with her mother's health hanging on her income. But then she remembered the way he had looked at her while spelling her name. Not like an employer, not like a CEO, like a man seeing someone he wanted to understand. And slowly, despite every warning her mind shouted, her heart began to soften. For Alexander, the shift was undeniable. At first, it had been admiration for her kindness, her quiet dignity. But the more time he spent at her side, the more he realized he was falling. He admired the way her laughter was unforced, the way she spoke of her mother with devotion, the way she carried herself with humility despite all she endured. He found himself thinking about her during meetings, distracted when investors droned on. At night, he lingered in the lobby long after she left, as though her presence lingered in the air. It terrified him. He was a man who didn't lose control. But Naomi Johnson was unraveling the careful walls he had built around himself. And though he knew the risks, the board, the press, the whispers, Alexander couldn't walk away. He didn't just admire Naomi. He was falling in love with her. The night was unusually quiet. A storm had rolled through the city earlier, leaving the streets slick and glistening, the tower's glass facade reflecting streaks of lightning. Naomi entered the lobby with her mop bucket as always, but she didn't get far. Alexander was already there, not in his usual place near the reception desk, not leaning casually as though he had stumbled upon her by chance. This time he waited with intention, his tall frame centered beneath the chandelier's glow. He wore a dark blue shirt with the collar open, and in his hands, he carried 2 steaming cups. Naomi hesitated at the door, her instinct to flee warring with the warmth that flooded her chest. He looked up, his eyes finding hers immediately, and for a moment it was as though the tower held only the 2 of them. I thought you might want coffee, he said simply, holding out 1 cup. She blinked, dumbstruck. Coffee? From that little shop on 3rd you mentioned? He explained. The one that stays open late. Naomi's breath caught. He remembered. She had told him about it in passing, weeks ago, when she described the only cafe that didn't chase her out for nursing a single cup for hours. She hadn't expected him to even notice, let alone act on it. Tentatively, she took the cup, her fingers brushing his. Heat rushed through her hand at the contact. You didn't have to. I wanted to, Alexander said. They sat together in the employee lounge, the hum of the vending machines their only company. Naomi perched on the edge of a plastic chair, uncomfortable in her work uniform, aware of every wrinkle in her faded janitor's shirt. Alexander, in contrast, looked out of place in the cheap room, his presence too commanding for the linoleum and flickering fluorescent light. But he seemed unbothered. He stirred sugar into his coffee, watching her with an expression that softened each time she lifted her cup. Why do you do this? Naomi finally asked, her voice low. Come down here. Talk to me. Alexander leaned back, considering his words. Because you're the only person in this building who doesn't pretend. She frowned. Pretend. He nodded. Everyone else has an angle. They want something. Approval, promotion, power. You signed hello because you wanted to help. No one was watching. Except me. Her heart fluttered at the admission, but fear laced through it. That's not enough reason for you to be here. I'm just. Don't say it. He cut in gently, his eyes sharp. Don't say just a janitor. You're Naomi. And that's reason enough. She fell silent, the weight of his words pressing against walls she had spent years building around herself. Over the next hour, their conversation deepened. Naomi told him about her childhood, about growing up with parents who fought more often than they smiled, about her father leaving when she was 14, about stepping into adult responsibilities before she was ready. She told him about her mother's illness, about nights when she skipped meals to make sure the pharmacy bills were covered. Alexander listened without interrupting, his gaze steady, his expression unreadable yet achingly attentive. When she finished, embarrassed by her own honesty, he surprised her by speaking of himself. My father was a man who believed weakness was unforgivable, he said. He raised me with numbers and expectations, not affection. When he died, I inherited his empire, but also his shadow. Every decision I make, I hear his voice asking if it's enough. Naomi studied him, seeing not the billionaire CEO but a man with cracks in his armor, haunted by someone else's ghost. For the first time, she understood his constant drive, the relentless perfection. You've done more than enough, she said quietly. He gave a short laugh, bitter and soft. Not to him. Then stop trying to prove it to him, she said, surprising herself with the boldness. Prove it to yourself. Her words struck him harder than he expected. He looked at her, really looked at her, and something shifted in his chest. By the time Naomi glanced at the clock, her shift was almost over. She rose quickly, flustered by how much time had slipped away. I should get back. I still have floors to finish. Alexander stood as well. Naomi. She paused, her hand tightening on the strap of her apron. He stepped closer, his voice low, hesitant for the first time. I don't want this to stay in hallways and break rooms. I want more. Her breath caught. More. I want to know you beyond these walls, he said. Dinner. A walk. Anything. Her heart pounded, torn between longing and fear. Every instinct screamed that this was dangerous, that people like him didn't fall for women like her, that if she let herself believe, she could lose everything. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw no arrogance, no pity, only sincerity, only a man asking, not commanding. She struggled, words tangled on her tongue. Finally, she whispered, I don't know if I can. Then let me wait until you can, he said. Silence stretched between them. Then Naomi gave a small nod, her defenses crumbling just enough to let hope slip in. Later that night, as she walked home beneath the still dripping trees, Naomi replayed every moment. The coffee, his confession, the way his eyes softened when he said he wanted more. She wanted to resist, to protect herself, but she couldn't deny it any longer. Alexander Harrington, the billionaire CEO who commanded boardrooms with an iron will, was falling in love with her. And against every ounce of her better judgment, she was beginning to fall in love with him too. Naomi had always believed in the power of invisibility. When nobody noticed you, you couldn't be mocked. When you kept quiet, you couldn't be judged. But now she was visible, painfully, dangerously visible, and she hated the way it felt. It started small. A whisper in the supply room. A sideways glance from another janitor as she pushed her cart down the hall. A receptionist who smiled too sweetly, her voice dripping with false warmth. Naomi felt it before she heard it. The shift in the air, the subtle tension that followed her through every corridor of Harrington Tower. The gossip had begun. She didn't have to overhear much to know the truth. Someone had seen her in the lounge with Alexander. Maybe it was a guard, maybe an employee leaving late. Either way, the story spread quickly. The billionaire CEO spending late nights with the janitor. It was too scandalous not to repeat. Naomi wanted to crawl back into shadows. But each night, Alexander appeared as he always did, undeterred. If anything, he was more intentional. He brought her dinner in takeout bags, insisting she eat, when she admitted she often skipped meals. He practiced signing with her, fumbling with words like hope and brave, until she laughed despite herself. He asked about her mother and even arranged for a company car to take Marjorie to her next appointment, though Naomi protested. "You don't need to do this," she told him one night, frustration bleeding through her fear. "I want to," he replied. "Naomi, you don't understand. You've given me more in these weeks than I've been given in years. Do you think I care what people say?" But Naomi cared. Every glance, every whisper felt like a blade pressed to her throat. She thought of her mother, of the rent, of how fragile her life was. One wrong move, and she could lose everything. The pressure reached a breaking point when Alexander's board of directors confronted him. It happened during a late-night meeting on the 42nd floor, where the city skyline glittered through floor-to-ceiling windows. The directors sat in leather chairs, their faces stern. "We've heard the rumors." One of them, a gray-haired man named Whitaker, said bluntly. "The staff are talking. The press will pick it up next." Alexander sat at the head of the table, his jaw tight, his hands steepled. And Whitaker continued, "You're the face of Harrington Global. Investors already question your judgment because of your age. Do you really want to hand them more ammunition? You can't risk your reputation over a janitor." The words struck Alexander like a slap. His instinct was to rise, to slam his fist on the table, to remind them whose name was carved on the building. But instead, he leaned back, his expression cold. "My personal life is not up for discussion," he said evenly. "And Naomi Johnson is not just anything." The room fell silent at the rare sharpness in his voice. Still, Whitaker pressed on. "You need to think carefully. Relationships like this don't stay private. And when they go public, they don't end well. For you or for her." Alexander dismissed the meeting soon after, but the warning lingered. For the first time, he realized that his feelings for Naomi weren't just personal. They had the power to shake everything he had built. Naomi felt the consequences on her side, too. One evening, as she refilled her bucket, her supervisor, a sharp-faced woman named Linda, cornered her in the supply closet. "I don't know what you think you're doing," Linda hissed, her eyes narrowed. "But men like him don't stay with women like you. You'll be a headline for a week, then forgotten. Don't drag this department down with your foolishness." Naomi's cheeks burned. "It's not." "Don't bother lying," Linda snapped. "Everyone's seen him with you. Enjoy your little fairy tale while it lasts, but don't cry when he drops you. And when he does, don't expect your job to still be here." Naomi stood frozen as Linda shoved past her, the bucket handle digging into her palms. Shame, fear, and anger warred inside her chest. That night, she avoided Alexander, hurrying through her rounds without looking his way. But he noticed, of course. He always noticed. "Naomi," he called softly as she tried to leave early. She stopped, her shoulders tense. "What's wrong?" he asked, stepping closer. Her throat tightened. "This is wrong, Alexander. All of it. People are talking. My boss hates me. Your board hates me. It's going to ruin everything." He reached for her hand, but she pulled it back. "Naomi." "No," she whispered, fighting tears. "You don't understand. I can't afford to risk this. Not with my mother depending on me. Not with everything on the line. I'm not like you. I can't just brush it off." Alexander's chest ached at the sight of her trembling. He wanted to promise her safety, to swear he would shield her from everything. But he knew words alone weren't enough. "I don't care about the board," he said firmly. "I don't care about whispers. What I care about is you." He stopped himself, the weight of the words pressing against his lips. "I need you to believe that." Naomi shook her head, backing away. "I want to. But wanting doesn't change the world." With that, she turned and left the lobby, her footsteps echoing across the marble. That night, Alexander stood alone under the chandelier, his fists clenched at his sides. He had faced billion-dollar takeovers, ruthless competitors, and political scandals. But nothing had shaken him like Naomi walking away. He realized then that this wasn't infatuation. It wasn't fascination. It was love, raw, terrifying, and unstoppable. And love, unlike business, wasn't something he could control. The storm broke on a Friday evening. Naomi arrived for her shift already exhausted. Her diner job had run long, and she hadn't eaten more than a half slice of toast all day. All she wanted was to slip into the tower, keep her head down, and disappear into the rhythm of mop strokes and bleach. But when she entered the lobby, the air felt different. Heavy, expectant. A man in a suit was waiting for her by the elevators. "Miss Johnson," he said curtly, "you're needed upstairs. Executive floor." Her heart sank. Nobody summoned janitors to the 42nd floor. She tried to protest, but the man's face made it clear refusal wasn't an option. Hands trembling, she followed him into the elevator. The ride felt endless, each floor number glowing like a countdown to doom. When the door slid open, she stepped out into a world of glass walls and sleek furniture, a place she had only glimpsed from afar. Her sneakers squeaked against the polished floor as she was ushered into the conference room. Inside sat the board of directors, their faces grim. At the head of the table stood Alexander. Naomi froze in the doorway. She understood immediately. She was the subject of this meeting. "Miss Johnson," one director said, his voice clipped, "we've heard troubling accounts of your interactions with Mr. Harrington." Naomi's throat tightened. Do you believe it's appropriate," another cut in, "for an employee in your position to distract the CEO from his duties?" The word distract landed like a stone. Naomi's gaze dropped to the floor, humiliation burning through her. She wanted to vanish, to melt into the marble. She opened her mouth to speak, but Alexander's voice thundered across the room. "Enough." Every head turned. Alexander's expression was sharper than Naomi had ever seen, his eyes blazing. He stepped forward, his presence filling the space. "You think Naomi is a distraction?" he said, his voice low, dangerous. "You think kindness is a threat to this company?" The directors shifted uncomfortably, but Alexander didn't let them speak. He continued, his words cutting through the tension like a blade. "Naomi Johnson is the only person in this building who had the courage to see another human being instead of a balance sheet. She signed hello to a guest when no one else bothered to care. Do you understand what that means? Do you realize the value of compassion?" Whitaker, the gray-haired director, cleared his throat. "Alexander, no one is questioning the gesture itself, but the perception." "I don't give a damn about perception," Alexander snapped. He turned, his eyes locking onto Naomi's. "What I care about is her." The room fell silent. Naomi's breath caught, her pulse hammering. Alexander took another step closer, his voice softening. "Naomi, I should have said this sooner. I'm not fascinated by you. I'm not curious. I'm in love with you, and I won't hide it. Not from them, not from anyone." Gasps rippled around the table. Naomi felt her knees weaken. She gripped the back of a chair, her vision blurring with tears. "You," she struggled to form words. "You can't mean that." "I do," Alexander said firmly. His gaze never wavered. "I've built an empire on control, but with you, I don't want control. I just want honesty. You are the first person who's ever given that to me, and I won't let anyone take you from me." Her chest heaved, torn between terror and overwhelming emotion. Part of her wanted to run, to escape the judgmental eyes burning into her. But another part, the part that had been starved of love and dignity for so long, wanted to believe him, needed to believe him. Whitaker rose from his seat, his face red. "Alexander, this is reckless. This woman." "Say her name," Alexander interrupted coldly. Whitaker faltered. "Her name," Alexander repeated, his voice sharp as steel, "is Naomi Johnson. And she is not a scandal. She is the woman I love. If that makes me reckless, then so be it." For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. Naomi's eyes filled with tears. She had never asked for this, the spotlight, the spectacle. But she could not deny what she saw in Alexander's eyes, truth. He wasn't playing a part, wasn't performing for the board. He meant every word. Her heart cracked open, fragile and terrified but alive. When the meeting ended, Naomi fled the room, needing air, space, anything but those walls. She hurried down the corridor, wiping at her cheeks, but Alexander followed. "Naomi, wait." She stopped near the glass windows overlooking the city. Rain streaked the glass, the skyline a blur of lights. She turned to face him, her voice trembling. "Why did you do that? Why say it in front of them?" "Because it's true," he said. "And because you deserve more than whispers and shadows. You deserve to be acknowledged." Her tears fell freely now. "Do you understand what this means for me? I could lose my job. I could lose everything. Then you'll have me, he said simply. Her breath caught. And what happens when you change your mind? When you realize I don't belong in your world? Alexander stepped closer, his hand lifting to brush a tear from her cheek. Naomi, my world has been empty for years. You're the first thing that makes it feel real. I'm not going to change my mind. Not now. Not ever. She searched his face, looking for cracks, for the lie. But all she saw was sincerity, raw, unguarded, terrifying in its honesty. Her defenses crumbled. With a sob, she let him pull her into his arms, his embrace firm and steady, as though he had been waiting his whole life to hold her. For the first time, Naomi allowed herself to believe it. Alexander Harrington, Billionaire CEO, loved her. And she loved him too. The news spread through Harrington Tower like wildfire. By Monday morning, whispers had turned into open speculation, and speculation into near certainty. The CEO's private life was suddenly public property. Employees huddled in break rooms, speaking Naomi's name as though it were a scandal, a joke, or a fairy tale, depending on who was telling it. Naomi felt the weight of every glance. Every time she pushed her cart down a hall, conversations hushed. Every time she entered a room, eyes lingered too long. She tried to shrink, to disappear back into invisibility, but it was impossible now. At home, her mother noticed immediately. You've been quiet, Marjorie said one evening as Naomi helped her settle into her chair. More than usual. Naomi hesitated. How could she explain? That the most powerful man in the city had confessed his love for her in front of his entire board? That she was caught between the pull of her heart and the crushing fear of losing everything? People are talking, Naomi admitted softly. Marjorie studied her daughter, her eyes sharp despite the years. And do you care what they say? Naomi swallowed hard. I shouldn't. But yes, I do. Mom, this isn't just dangerous for me. It's dangerous for him too. Her mother reached for her hand, squeezing it weakly but firmly. Dangerous or not, child, don't run from happiness when it finally knocks. It doesn't come often. Naomi blinked back tears, her mother's words echoing in her chest. Meanwhile, Alexander faced his own storm. The board had not forgotten his defiance. They pressed harder, warning him of investor backlash, of reputational risks, of the potential implosion of carefully built partnerships. But Alexander didn't bend. In fact, he doubled down. The first proof came quietly. Naomi arrived for work one night to find her cleaning supplies reassigned. Instead of the lobby and hallways, she was listed for office detail on the executive floor, a place no janitor typically touched. Confused, she approached the supervisor's desk. This can't be right, she said. Linda, the supervisor who had cornered her before, sneered. Oh, it's right. CEO's orders. Apparently, you're special now. The words dripped with contempt, but Naomi ignored them. She gathered her supplies and went upstairs. When she entered the executive lounge, she found Alexander waiting. You did this? She asked, startled. He nodded. I don't want you hiding in corners. If they're going to whisper, let them whisper. But at least you'll be near me. Her throat tightened. Alexander, that doesn't make it easier for me. It makes it worse. They already think. Let them think, he interrupted. His gaze was steady, unshaken. Naomi, I've spent years letting this company dictate who I should be. I won't let them dictate who I love. Her heart stuttered at the word. Love. Spoken again, simply, as though it were the most natural truth. Still, Naomi struggled. One evening, after a particularly harsh encounter with Linda, who had muttered that she was sleeping her way into power, Naomi fled to the stairwell, her hands shaking. She sat on the cold steps, her chest tight with shame. Moments later, the door opened, and Alexander appeared. He knelt in front of her, his suit jacket brushing against the concrete, his face etched with concern. Naomi, he murmured. What happened? She shook her head, tears spilling. I don't belong here. They're right. I'm nothing compared to your world. I don't have the right clothes, the right background, the right anything. Alexander cupped her face, tilting it up until her eyes met his. Naomi Johnson, don't you dare measure your worth against them. You belong wherever you choose to stand. And if anyone has a problem with that, they'll answer to me. She searched his eyes, desperate for reassurance. But what if you get tired of defending me? What if one day you decide it's easier to let me go? His gaze softened, fierce and tender all at once. Then I'll spend every day proving to you that I won't. And he did. He arranged for Naomi's mother to receive proper medical care, bringing in specialists from across the city. He funded the community center where Naomi had once taken her sign language class, expanding its programs so others could learn without barriers. But more than grand gestures, it was the small things that undid her. The way he practiced signing her name until he got it perfect. The way he brought her sandwiches wrapped in paper because he noticed she skipped dinner too often. The way he stood beside her in silence when words failed, never rushing her, never demanding more than she could give. Slowly, Naomi's fear began to loosen its grip. One night, as they stood together in the empty lobby, Alexander signed clumsily but proudly, "Beautiful." Naomi laughed through her tears. "That's not how you sign it." She corrected his fingers, guiding his hands with her own. The contact lingered, warm and charged. Alexander didn't let go. "I mean it," he said softly, his voice steady. "You're beautiful. Not because of what anyone else sees, but because of who you are. And I'm not going anywhere." Naomi's chest swelled with a mix of joy and terror. For so long, she had lived invisible, unseen. Now, she was at the center of someone's world, and not just anyone's. A man who could have chosen anyone, and yet he chose her. She didn't say it back yet. She couldn't. But deep inside, she knew it was true. She loved him. That night, as Naomi rode the bus home, the city lights blurring past the window, she rested her forehead against the glass and whispered to herself, "Don't run. Not this time." Alexander Harrington had proven his love not with words alone, but with action. And for the first time, Naomi began to believe she could let herself fall. Spring came slowly to the city. The biting winds softened, trees along the avenues burst into fragile blossoms, and Harrington Tower seemed to gleam brighter in the morning sun. Naomi's life, too, was transforming, not overnight, but in ways she could no longer deny. Gone were the nights of scrubbing floors unseen. She still worked hard, but now her work carried weight. After weeks of insisting, Alexander had convinced her to take a new role, one created especially for her. Community Liaison for Harrington Global. The title sounded foreign to her ears, almost laughable. Yet the job was real, helping design programs to connect the company with underserved communities, expanding accessibility initiatives, and supporting the sign language center he had quietly funded in her name. Naomi no longer carried a mop bucket. Instead, she carried ideas, suggestions, and a voice she never imagined would matter. At first, she resisted. She felt like an imposter each time she walked into a meeting room wearing borrowed blouses instead of her janitor's uniform. But Alexander never let her doubt linger long. "You belong here," he reminded her often, steady and calm. "Not because of me, but because of you. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." And when she faltered, when the old fears crept in late at night, he was there, practicing signs with her until laughter eased her nerves, holding her hand until sleep claimed her. One Saturday, he invited her and her mother to the newly renovated community center. Naomi walked in and froze. Bright murals painted by local artists covered the walls. Children laughed as they practiced the alphabet in sign language, their hands moving eagerly. In the corner, a plaque gleamed. The Naomi Johnson Program for Communication and Access. Her knees nearly gave out. You named it after me," she whispered. Alexander stood beside her, his arms slipping gently around her shoulders. "Because you reminded me what matters," he said. "This wouldn't exist without you." Tears blurred her vision. For so long, she had believed her life was nothing but survival. No legacy, no impact, just endless work. Yet here was proof that her kindness, her courage, had rippled outward into something lasting. Her mother squeezed her hand, her voice trembling with pride. "He sees you, Naomi. Truly sees you." Naomi glanced at Alexander then, her heart swelling. His eyes held no pity, no pride in ownership. Only love, raw, steady, and real. Still, not everyone approved. Gossip still swirled. Headlines occasionally speculated about the billionaire and the janitor, though Alexander refused to entertain them. At board meetings, Whitaker still pressed about image and reputation. But Alexander no longer flinched. He stood by Naomi openly, arriving at events with her on his arm, introducing her proudly as his partner, never once hiding her away. The world could whisper, but his actions shouted louder. Naomi was not a secret. She was his choice. For Naomi, the fear of rejection slowly melted into trust. Each day he proved it again, not just with money or power, but with constancy. He called her between meetings just to hear her voice. He showed up at her apartment carrying groceries when her fridge was bare. He sat with her mother for hours, listening to old stories, never rushing. He loved her not despite who she was, but because of it. One evening, months after that stormy boardroom confrontation, Alexander waited for Naomi in the lobby. The building was empty, the city outside buzzing with spring's energy. She entered wearing a simple dress he had once told her was his favorite, soft blue, with sleeves that brushed her wrists. He stepped forward, nerves flickering in his eyes, though his voice was steady. "Naomi," he said, signing her name clumsily at the same time. She laughed softly, tears already threatening. "You still mess up the J. Then I'll keep practicing," he said. He took her hands, holding them firmly in his own. "Because I don't plan to stop saying your name. Not for the rest of my life." Her breath caught as he sank to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside, a simple ring gleamed, elegant, but not ostentatious, exactly the kind of beauty Naomi embodied. "I don't need boardrooms or empires," Alexander said, his voice low but certain. "I need you. Naomi Johnson, will you marry me?" The world seemed to still. Naomi's hands trembled in his. Tears spilled down her cheeks, her heart hammering with joy and disbelief. For a lifetime, she had been invisible. But here she was, chosen, seen, loved. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, then rose, pulling her into his arms. She buried her face in his chest, laughing and sobbing at once, the sound muffled by the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Months later, on a bright spring morning, Naomi walked through the lobby of Harrington Tower not as a janitor, but as the woman the CEO loved openly. Employees no longer whispered, or if they did, she no longer cared. At the base of the glass staircase, Alexander waited, smiling. He signed to her, clumsy still, but proud. "Hello, my love." Naomi's laughter rang out, clear and bright. She signed back, her movements fluid, sure. "Hello, Alexander." And in that moment, everything felt whole. The billionaire who had once stood alone in shadows, and the shy janitor who once believed invisibility was safety, now faced the world side by side. Their hands spoke the language that had brought them together, a language born of courage, kindness, and love. The empire around them still glittered, but neither cared. Because for the first time, both believed in something more valuable than power or wealth. They believed in each other. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the next story waiting for you on screen.